up there.
Well, joyful noise. Right. Very good. Well, welcome everybody. Take somebody's hand. Great.
Would you two stop?
God, we're so grateful for your love and your presence with us. We thank you for our church, our members and friends and families, and we ask you to bless them right now and bless our conversation and sharing together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Well, welcome to sort of this one-time Bible study where Vicki and I were just sort of experimenting over the last year. What kind of things do you like to do, and how do you learn? I have different ideas about that, and just always welcome feedback. But it was probably one of the things I missed the most when I wasn't pastoring a church was doing Bible study, especially, I mean all kinds of study, but especially Bible study. So I picked a story that I think is interesting and complicated and dramatic, and it's like right in the middle of the book of Acts. And so we're sort of kind of delving right into the middle of a story. So I'll give a little background about how we got to this point. And we'll read the passage together. And then it has three parts, and I kind of want to talk through that. And I very much welcome an interruption or a question. Hey, there you are. Find a chair, I think there's one here. And a Bible. So the book of Acts was written by the same person who wrote the book of Luke. Oftentimes it's called Luke Acts. And we know that because of the linguistics, the style of writing, and the way that the book of Acts kind of refers to the book of Luke. Tradition has it that it was Luke the physician who wrote that. And, you know, of all many writings in the Bibles are attributed to people, and it may have been their disciples or others who actually wrote it. But I actually believe that Luke the physician probably was the kind of original storyteller or author. Now, you know, if you think about how books of the Bible were written, of course, some books of the Bible are history, some are psalms, which are psalms in book, some are prophecy, some are gospels, some are letters to people. So you have all different kinds of literature. Luke is a gospel, but Acts is a very unique book that kind of tells the next part of the story after the death and resurrection of Jesus, is the birth of the church. And the book of Acts is really the only kind of church history book, but it isn't history like we would think of history so much. It's really this very exciting account of people whose lives were turned upside down by Jesus, by knowing Jesus or encountering Jesus, as Paul did, and who devote their lives to this new movement, this church. And so the book of Acts, is written, and Luke, probably like a lot of things get written now, you know, it's sort of like, you know, we're working on a new brochure for the church, and maybe Liz takes the first crack and writes, you know, the brochure, but then she kicks it up to the pastors, and we kind of look at it, and we each make our little editings, and then Carla, you know, puts it in the computer, and then she makes some editorial changes, and then the deacons take a look at it, and they add their little piece to it, and then finally you get something of a brochure, and that's, of course, that's the first draft of the brochure. And then a year later, when things change again, take that draft and, well, can we change it up and add some things into it? Well, books of the Bible were really created like that. And of course, for most of us in our fantasy, it's some very holy person, you know, with a quill pen or some kind of thing, or, you know, etching onto this paper, you know, just pouring out their heart, and that's the book we have. But really, that was probably a first step. But beyond that, many people had their hands in creating this. And sometimes the first books were really just stories that were told orally, and some got written down in different ways. But some editor, was very careful to make sure that this book of Acts kind of told the story from the death of Jesus and the ascension of Jesus until the church comes to Rome. And that's kind of where the story ends in the book of Acts. And there really isn't any other biblical history beyond that in the New Testament. And you think that the people who started the Christian church, the only Bible they had was what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. They didn't have a New Testament. They didn't have any of that. They were the New Testament. Their stories and their experiences became the New Testament. The New Testament as we know it didn't really get approved by the church until the year 325. That's, almost 300 years. And books in the New Testament, some of them were written as late as 120 AD. So somewhere between the 50s and 70s later, all of the books we know as the New Testament were written in some form and get approved in their final version 200 years later. So this is a very human story, and one of my favorite writers said, the thing about the Bible, it's like Jesus, it's fully human and fully divine. So I picked this story partly because it's a story about jail and prison. And I always find, I don't know about in my life, I don't know what it says about me, but I am always very moved and about stories about jail and prison. Whether it's Shawshank Redemption, one of my all-time favorite movies. Maybe the first movie I ever saw, adult movie I ever saw, was Birdman of Alcatraz. I think of The Green Mile. Or, of course, more contemporary, Orange is the New Black. But I think about stories about jail and prison because I was thinking in prison, I did prison ministry with actual people in prison in Los Angeles, Detroit and Los Angeles, mostly Los Angeles. Mostly women, but some also the men's jail in downtown Los Angeles. But what I found was that grace and kindness in a prison is always sweeter and kinder somehow. Grace and kindness feels more like grace and kindness in a prison, and cruelty is crueler. So it's a kind of a place where those extremes are felt, and this story is partly about that. And basically we're going to explore what really this story is about and what we think it's about and what it might say to us. I also think Reverend Elder Frida Smith a long, long time ago said that she thought MCC was the most exciting church since the Book of Acts. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think in many ways it's been my experience, and that there's something about the Book of Acts that feels very contemporary to me and very real, and I relate to it. So we're going to start by actually reading the story out of Acts 16. And if you come to the 16th verse, and we're going to read all the way till 40. And it's a three-part story. So I'd like someone to read 16 through 18. Nice loud voice. Okay, 16 through 18 of chapter 16.
One day, as we were going down to the place of prayer besides the river, we met a demon-possessed slave girl who was a fortune teller and earned much money for her masters. She followed along behind us, shouting, "These men are servants of God, and they have come to tell you how to have your sins forgiven." This went on day after day until Paul, in great distress, turned and spoke to the demons within her. "I command you in the name of Jesus to come out of her," he said, and instantly it left her.
Okay, very dramatic start to the story. Then verses 19 to 24. Who would read that? Now, nice loud voice. 19 to 24. Okay.
And this is going to be quite a different version.
All right.
And when her masters saw that the hope of their gains were gone, they caught Paul and Silas and drew them into the marketplace unto the rulers, and brought them to the magistrates, saying, These men, being Jews, do exceedingly trouble our city, and teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. And the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates rent off their clothes, and commanded to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely, who, having received such a charge, thrust them into the inner prison, and made their feet fast in the stocks.
Okay, next section is a little longer, verse 25 all the way through to 34. Go ahead, Terry. Nice loud voice.
Another different version. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once all the prison doors flew open, and everybody's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself, we are all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in his house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his family were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them, and the whole family was filled with joy because they had come to believe in God.
All right, the last section, 35 through 40. Someone in a nice little, Sharon, you want to read a nice loud voice?
When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, release those men. The jailer told Paul, "The magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave. Go in peace." But Paul said to the officers, "They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now do they want to get rid of us quietly? No. Let them come themselves and escort us out." The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. They came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. After Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house, where they met with the brothers and encouraged them. Then they left.
So there's the story in 3 parts. First is how they got into jail. What was this story? It was a woman possessed by a spirit of divination, it says, or many other things, or a demon, or we might think of her as mentally ill, we don't know. Then they get into jail. What happens while they're in jail? And then what happens when they get out of jail? And in it you see a lot about Paul's personality, his kind of fearlessness in some ways, and the many issues that are very contemporary. Citizenship, you know, who has rights and who doesn't have rights, and it was very interesting stories. So part 1, we'll start, is this is the beginning of Paul's, what's called second missionary journey. And from the beginning, you know, Paul was the one who was persecuting Christians. Anybody else, anything else you know about Paul? And how did he happen to go from being Saul to being Paul?
He was struck blind on the road to Damascus?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was on his way to Damascus to do what?
Persecute something.
Right. He was there to persecute Christians. He was going to go round up Christians And he saw himself as a zealot, and saw these Christians as troublemakers. They were heretics. They were, making trouble, especially for Jews, so already enough trouble in the Roman Empire. And suddenly, Paul has this kind of a breakdown experience where, in some sense, it says he saw a light, or he heard a voice, and he heard Jesus saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And in the middle of this, Saul had this experience. He went to be baptized, and he regained his sight. But his whole life was turned inside out, upside his identity. And Paul, who had been someone who very strictly followed the law, who you might think had a very orderly life, suddenly his whole life is turned upside down. And for the rest of Paul's life, he doesn't know what's going to happen one day after the other. All kinds of things happen. And he becomes a very vocal, enthusiastic, one of the greatest preachers in the New Testament. Someone who can tell the story of Jesus' radical love and grace. And Paul, who had been, so strict in his own faith, suddenly becomes the apostle to the Gentiles, people he's not supposed to have dinner with or have a conversation with.
Very good.
And you sure you pick up a Bible? You got one, good. So, suddenly Paul gets this mission that he's supposed to talk to the Gentiles. And in fact, it was very unpopular among some of the Jewish Christian leaders. And, there's a lot of antagonism and struggle. Here is Paul, who had been so strict, and now he's saying, well, I think we should reach out to everybody. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. We are all one in Christ Jesus. Paul says these things. And so one author says he became the apostle of the heart set free. Oh. The heart set free, which is just really also not exactly his personality. So you have this struggle. And so the first thing on the second missionary journey, in which he takes Silas with him, who is also a Jew and a Roman citizen and a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And the first thing they do is they end up in Philippi, which is in Europe now, actually, outside of the Middle East. Now, the first time they really set ground, the first church in Europe is in Philippi. And they come across a woman named Lydia, who has a group of women, Jewish women, who pray, and he tells them the story of Jesus, and Lydia becomes baptized. There's this new movement in church in Philippi. And this is the kind of thing that happens to Paul and Silas. They go along, they meet people, they tell them the story. As people are moved or transformed, then he baptizes them and they start meeting, and then Paul moves on and goes on to the next thing. Sometimes he's lucky enough to hear from them or to go back and visit again, but he really kind of sets people on this path. And as they're doing this, they're in Philippi when this story happens. And
Did Saul become Paul when he was converted?
Yes.
On the road?
Yes, that's a Greek version, really. Paul is actually a Greek or Gentile version name of what Saul would have been.
But did he hear the Lord speak to him?
Yes.
That you were now Paul?
No, it just becomes, for him, it's like, that I will change your name, I have a new name, it's this new identity in who I am. I don't know that it had a cause, but it was for him, it becomes, in the book of Acts you just read, that one minute it's Saul, and the next minute he's called Paul. So we don't even really have an explanation for that, sort of why that happened. So here they are, they're going to the place of prayer, which would be maybe where Lydia and the women met, or a place of prayer could have been the synagogue, or it could have been just a place near the river. When it says they met a slave girl, and what happened was she had this spirit of divination, which we might say she had, a mental illness, but just like with Jesus, often in the Gospels, when Jesus would walk by, if someone was possessed by a demon or whatever, they would cry out. They would say that the demons recognized Jesus and felt threatened by this holy presence. And sometimes they were the first ones to recognize Jesus. And so this woman is crying out, and she says, you know, these men, Paul and Silas, are slaves, servants of the Most High God. And so she says, you know, they'll tell you about the way of salvation. And I guess she does this day after day after day. And truthfully, what happened was Paul got annoyed. It says disturbed. In my version, it says he was annoyed, which gives you a little bit insight. He was still Paul in his personality, right? And so, almost like in an impulse of feeling irritated by this, he casts out her demon, and she is in her right mind. Well, what are the consequences of this? What does the story say? What's the consequences?
When her owners found out that she couldn't make money.
Right. So, Paul and so they have disrupted commerce.
Yeah.
In this little city. They have interrupted a terrible oppression that this woman has had, not only in her illness, but that today we would say she was being trafficked,
Yeah.
a victim of human trafficking. She was enslaved and forced to work and sit out, and whatever happened, she felt she would say. And so, you know, there are many unintended consequences of this, what Paul did. Now, in one sense, you can say what he did was a great thing, because here is a person who was not in their right mind, who now has their mind and spirit back. On the other hand, you know, we don't really know what becomes of her. We certainly know that the owners felt like, you know, hey, you're two Jews, you're coming here messing with us, and we don't do that. We don't do things like that here in Philippi. You know, you're in Europe now. You know, you're not where you came from, and so you know, and so they get extremely angry. In fact, you know, they have them beaten, and they send them to jail, and the jailer throws them into the deepest, darkest lockup. So questions or thoughts about this for me? It's quite it's an amazing story.
Yeah. But it's like they robbed, or Paul robbed them of their property.
Yes.
They took
Absolutely.
They took a valuable
Source of income.
thing, source of income,
Right.
and
It's
took
not
it away.
shown.
Right. And what about her?
Yeah, who cares about her?
Right.
They didn't care about her.
They didn't care about her.
And it's not really clear that Paul cared about her that much either. She was just an annoyance, or the demon was an annoyance to him at
Right.
the time. I don't know if it
Right.
follows up anywhere else to...
Right. And what's funny is that in this part of the book of Acts, just this little part, the tense changes from reporting in the third person to, it says we. We set sail from Troas, and then one day we were going to the place of prayer. This is obviously an account from Silas, you know, and it doesn't continue, you know, pretty soon you get back to the third person, but you have just a few paragraphs where we actually hear the voice of Silas, who was with Paul. We did this, we did that. And it's kind of a little like he's telling on Paul, I think, in this, you know, tattling just slightly, you know. Well, he got us into trouble again. You know, you and your big mouth, or you and your temper a little bit. And even if it was, you know, trying to confront something that was oppressing her and hurting her, but it is kind of that they don't gloss over that. They don't say, oh, Paul, in a moment of great compassion, you know, just decided to heal this woman. You know, it's actually pretty real. You know, it kind of says, well, you know, it kind of got to him. And so what we don't have the answer to is what happened to her, which is a very, you know, powerful thing of understanding sometimes in these accounts, that how women don't matter much, or sometimes even somebody who's nameless, who has healing or who has an experience that we don't know their name, but they become part of a story that has consequences. And
Nancy,
yeah,
I think sometimes you have to take a look at the culture and the significance of the owners of the slave girl, because they have to save face. Who are these two people coming into our town,
Right.
telling us what to do, how to
Right.
act, all that stuff? If
Right.
they let go without being punished,
right,
what would that be saying to their community?
right.
So they had to do something.
Well, they were foreigners.
Yeah, to save face.
And they were people of a minority religion that really wasn't practiced much in that place. So I always have in my imagination that Lydia and her community reached out to this woman, you know. That's my best happy Pollyanna fantasy. that first Christian community.
Let it be so.
Yes, that's right.
Because she would certainly, the woman being healed, would certainly be open to, I would think, their reaching out to her since she was healed
Right,
by this,
right,
whatever it was. She
Right.
wouldn't know until they told her.
right. So that's my little midrash, my little thought of, you know, what in the best case scenario, that the rumor spread and that the small little community there reached out to her. So I like that. It's not in the Bible, but there you go.
Not everything in the Bible.
Right. So then that's kind of part one, which is, you know, how they got there. And then begins this second section, the longest section, the in jail part. And I love this because it starts out about midnight, you know. So here it's midnight in the darkest, innermost parts of this prison, you know. And it's dark, I would say a moonless night or something like that. But about midnight, after these guys have been beaten, so, you know, they're bloody and they're hungry and thirsty and they, you know. But it says, what are they doing?
Praying and singing.
Praying and singing, you know. What are they singing?
Hymns.
What would they be singing?
Hymns.
Psalms or hymns to God. And what a weird thing if you were a prisoner there. Can you imagine? It's midnight, it's dark. You're in that prison. You know, you're a thief or something happened to you, whatever. You ended up in jail, a miserable, terrible place to be. And you hear these two crazy people in the depths, you know, in the farthest hold of the jail. They're singing hymns. You know. Probably most of the people in that jail wouldn't have been Jews. They wouldn't even know. Maybe they didn't understand the language. But so how do you think they were singing? Were they singing softly?
Acapella.
Yeah, you could say Acapulco, right? Acapella. But I have a fantasy about how they were singing. What is your thought?
I think they were singing loudly.
Gusto.
They were
Bellow them into that.
singing for their lives. You know that song? Singing. I imagine them, I even think they were laughing sometimes. I think they were praying, and laughing, and singing. Doesn't say they were laughing, but in my mind, you know, that they were singing to encourage themselves. But that's, I think, not the only reason. And I think this is so important. This is one of my favorite lines in the whole book of Acts is this verse. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. I love that image. And one of the things I think about this is that the point that the author is making here is that even though Paul and Silas were in jail, they were free. Free people sing. You know, if you don't feel free, you don't sing. But Paul's life had been so turned upside down. He'd been shipwrecked, he'd been beaten before, all kinds of things had happened. But what he kind of said was, well, you know what, every day is a gift. So whatever comes any day is a day in which I love God and serve Jesus, you know, and it has to be a good day. And what it says to me is this prison did not enter, it was not in their minds, and it was not in their hearts. A lot of you think of the civil rights movement, where people who marched and sang, and they went to jail and they sang in jail. They all knew this verse. And they sang in the jail because they really believed that in their cause, that by being in jail, they were exercising their freedom. And in a sense, Paul and Silas, in just walking through the marketplace, in freeing people from demons and from whatever, they were living in Jesus. And they were free. So there's a tremendous irony. Yes, Doug?
I was just thinking about Negro spirituals during the civil rights era of the 1800s and 1700s, and how it seemed to me that people who were slaves were singing, and because of the redemption that they felt inside of them, the ability to be redeemed because of their spiritual faith.
Right.
And that's what I was being reminded of as you were talking about them singing because they felt they were free.
Yes, and all those songs about freedom that came out of deep oppression. But I love this verse because it says that when you read the story superficially, it's the people who are in prison are not the people who are in jail. Really, they are free. The people in jail are free. And then we come to the other people who are supposedly free, who actually are not. And then on top of everything else, you know, they're singing at midnight, there's an earthquake. So violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately the doors were opened and everyone's changed. You know, you couldn't get more dramatic than this, right? You know, so there's an earthquake. So I mean, if I was a prisoner, I think these guys brought on this earthquake, or you know, this is the end of the world is happening. You know, they're outside of prison. They don't know how bad the earthquake is. They don't know anything about it. So, anybody here ever been in an earthquake?
Oh, I thought you were going to say in a prison.
Tell me about the earthquake. Let's hear about the earthquake.
Any earthquake. I went to the big one in California in 1968. I had to go to work. It shook like this. I was in the desert, and I had to go into the city to San and then go back into the bed shook. We were fine, but getting there, the earthquakes kept going. And I had to go because the freeway was cut off. It split, it fell, we couldn't get it. I had to go through the mountain. And every time we were slowly, and it shook, and the rocks fell, and I kept going, and it took me, I think, 2 hours to get there.
Wow.
But I had to get to that hospital because I was in charge, so I had to get there.
Wow. Anybody else ever been in an earthquake and want to share a story? Cindy?
Mine's kind of similar. I was in California at Silas VA's on Community Hospital, and we had just started a surgery. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever been through. And the whole OR table, the patient's asleep on the table. Anesthesia had the patient intubated. So the whole table's going like this. And of course in the Army, all I've taught is rescue, right? So I like throw myself over the patient. And the anesthesia person's there. And I'm serious, the doctor and the other people ran out of the room and we're both standing there like, well, isn't this what we're supposed to do? But literally the building, you could feel the building swaying. And then there was just particulate that fell to the side of the floor. Wow. So yeah, that was bizarre. Yeah.
Anyone else ever been in this?
We had one in Baltimore 6 years ago, which it was, I was doing autopsies and everybody was running out of the hospital. I'm like, for God's sakes, are we being hostage? Or, you know, I didn't feel anything because it was too busy.
Yeah.
And everybody's outside and I kind of, like, well, all of my people are dead, so.
You're the only
it's not going to really matter too much about my people, but still, they are somebody, and I didn't want to leave them, so I walked out. I said, what's going on? I said, we just had an earthquake, and I said, and all of your patients are upstairs on ventilators and everything else, and what are they going to do? You know, it's just like everybody did, because I think it was probably the first that Baltimore had something like that.
Yeah,
and then we seen bricks falling off of the buildings out around the hospital, and it's like, oh gosh, this was real.
Right. One more person. You have a story, Mary?
Yeah. My parents lived in Southern California, and it wasn't a big earthquake. It was in 74 or 5 or something. And we were all out there visiting, and, you know, we felt this shift in the, and my nephew was sleeping. It was in the afternoon. He was a baby. So we were running in to see where he was, and he wasn't in the bed, because, you know, we didn't have, you know, but, so we go running around, looking. He had fallen out of bed and rolled underneath the bed. We couldn't find him.
Yeah, so you can imagine, you know, even in our times, we still have more communication or more possibility, but you think these guys all in this prison, oh my gosh, think the world's ending. But the other thing you notice at the end of that was all the doors flew open and all the chains fell off. Now there are other stories in the book of Acts where the doors fly open and people walk out of the prison, apostles, disciples, you know, thinking, okay, thank you God, you opened the door for me, I'm walking out of here, okay? But what's so fascinating about this story is that Paul and Silas don't do that, and they seem to convince the other prisoners also not to do it. Now it's probably dangerous, and you might not be able to see how you would get out or anything like that, but you know, if I were Paul or Silas, I might have thought, thank you God, okay, you know, knock down this knock, I can go free and go on and serve you and do all that. I would just sort of unquestioning, but they don't do that. And I would suggest partly that's because they are free, so whether they're in jail or not in jail is really irrelevant to them. What's relevant is God. What do you need from us in this moment? Not whether I get out of jail or not, or because I'm already free. And so instead it says, the jailer wakes up, sees the doors wide open, assumes, of course, that the prisoners have escaped. It's all going to be his fault. His life is now over. You know, this is just, like, this is the worst day he can ever imagine. And what he does is to draw his sword to kill himself. You know. So here's this person, and I would suggest that Paul and Silas are in jail and free, but the jailer is in prison. He's in a mental prison, a spiritual prison of fear. He probably feels like he has no choices in life. They told him to put these guys, you know, and he did what they told. He does what he's told to do. His whole life is driven by fear, and now the worst fear, you know, I've lost all my prisoners. Those people are just going to come after me, and I may as well end my life myself. But Paul shouts in a loud voice. Now, imagine how the jailer felt when someone shouts from the prison, "Do not harm yourself. We are all here." Now, you know, imagine that jailer just being shocked to his core. These prisoners, that voice of that prisoner says, I care about you. Do not harm yourself. We are all here. That must have felt to him like a spiritual earthquake. That's what it was. So there was the earthquake, but then there's his earthquake. He's in a place of dread and fear, living his life. Probably not a very happy guy. Probably was annoyed by hearing the singing and praying the night before. Didn't touch him, but suddenly, so this amazing thing happens then. What does he do? He says he called for the lights and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. You know, his whole life now has been turned upside down. he sees in them something maybe he's never seen in his life, which is something holy, full of grace. You know, I would think he would say, how did these guys get to be so happy singing hymns and caring more about me than about escaping from this terrible place? And so he says, sir, and uses the word, what must I do to be saved? What must I do to have what you have? I want to be like you, the jailer says. I'm tired of my life of fear. And you know, they just answered, all you have to do is believe. And it's not only the jailer, it says, but even his whole household. And then they took time to teach him, and somehow they get to the jailer's house. Now, I don't know if the jailer's house was adjacent to the prison, or it's a little unclear. But somehow they get a little out of the prison, and they're in with the family, and the jailer is just so full of love and gratitude. You know, now the jailer is taking more chances than he's taken ever. You know, he's defying the authorities. You know, he didn't just lock these guys up again, or you know, he took them to his home and they baptized his family. And then it says he brought them and set food, he feeds them, you know, and his whole family. They say this is a miracle. Now, what's really strange is that you think, isn't this jailer going to be kind of held accountable for this? And you know, the jailer could care less now. Like Paul and Silas, he has a new freedom. I'm going to take a leap here and said Lydia's people went to find him too. And they became new members at this, along with the woman who got them in trouble in the first place. But you can see there's kind of this little building of some kind of community that happens here. So this is kind of the heart and core of the story, where those who are in prison are really free, and those who are free are really in prison. You know, and I think we can think of many ways in which sometimes that's true. That people who supposedly have freedom don't act like they're free, and people who have reason to feel sometimes oppressed experience a great deal of freedom in having courage to be who we are. So suddenly what's a story about jail and earthquakes becomes a story about baptism and about new freedom. Paul, the apostle of the heart, said, I think what's so key in this story that is just how did Paul discern his earthquake? That's what I always say. We have to discern our earthquake. Sometimes the earthquake means one thing. It means get out of jail free, you know, okay. You know, go on your way. That's what Peter did at one point. You know, the door's open, he left. But for Paul, he took a minute. He discerned something of a greater cause. This jailer and his prison became Paul's cause. And that his cause was to help people be free in Christ. And suddenly, you know, he's helping to build this new community of Lydia's Philippi. Now then there's part 3. They're back in jail, you know. So somehow they all go traveling back to jail, just like nothing happened. It doesn't say that, but that's what must have happened. It says, when the magistrates came, okay, the police, oh, suddenly, they've had a change in attitude. They found out something. They found out that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. This was a card that Paul often pulled, you know, because born in Tarsus, he was a Roman citizen as well as a Jew. Many Jews from Israel weren't Roman citizens, but he was. And so he used that for everything it's worth. And so here you go, let those men go. And the jailer told this to Paul. Well, they say you can go now. And Paul says, not so fast, not so fast, not so fast. He's not above using what he has, again, for Christ, and for the sake of this community. And he says, you've done all these things to us. Let them come and take us out themselves, escort us out of this place. And so they do. They reported these words. They were afraid. So those who were afraid now are not afraid, but those who make others afraid suddenly become afraid because they've seen a power that they don't quite know what it is or what it means. And it says they apologized to them. I love this. And then they took them out and asked them, please leave our city. And but I love, but Paul, he won't be told what to do. I think, he must have been something to meet and work with. Not easy, I think. It says, after leaving the prison, they didn't just leave town. I love that. He doesn't follow instructions. He says, just like he has nothing to fear, they go to Lydia's house. This is what makes me think that something that was going on in Lydia's house with her community, that all the pieces were coming together. And when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed. So they not only stopped and told Lydia what had happened, maybe told her how to reach the jailer and his family, but they dallied, they took their time. It says they encouraged the brothers. I bet they got something to eat. I bet they stayed for lunch, stayed a little longer, prayed. They're not in a hurry. And I think this is what it is to walk in freedom, where whether you're in jail, or in Lydia's home, strolling through the marketplace, you know who you are, you know whose you are, and you know what your job is. Your job is to embody the freedom in having Christ, but also to share it with others. So, to me, this story is just full. I think they apologized to him. I thought, oh my gosh, Paul told them he was not undocumented after all, right?
I think Lydia was having like her own little church service.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. That's earlier in Acts 16. You hear that story where she is indeed the leader. And so they're citizens of the Roman Empire, but they serve a different empire. And that is Jesus' kingdom. Is their. That's where their real citizenship is. But they'll use the Roman citizenship. Questions or thoughts?
Well, I think that with them saying prayers, I'm sure they were praying for the prisoners in there too.
Right.
And they're all listening to this and everything. And I'm sure with the hymns and everything, it just made it like a religious thing, kind of sort of.
And that's what I kind of think with them singing and praying, that it was probably kind of their testimony to the other prisoners that.
Right.
So when the earthquake came, that just was the highlight of the movie. Oh my God! Look what these people have done.
Right. And you think, how many of those prisoners became curious? Or who were those?
I think
Who were those Mexican men?
They got saved that day. They got saved.
I just think it's fascinating that none of them left. I mean, that just kind of defies all
Right.
reason, right?
Right.
Because all of a sudden, you're in there for something, real or imagined,
Right.
right? And you have the opportunity to leave. I'll stick around.
When you think, is it Paul was the one who said, do not harm yourself, we are all here? Which is really the pivotal verse, isn't it, in the whole thing? It's that little moment of transformation, of redemption for this jailer. And you think, were the prisoners just too scared to cross Paul? Because, whoa, this guy has strong magic, he's kind of, or was it something that they just were as shocked as the jailer was, that Paul was calling them to care about this jailer? We don't know. So I asked the question, who do we think was most impacted by this event? The girl with the spirit of divination, Paul and Silas, the other prisoners, the authorities, the jailer and his family? All of them. But pick one. What?
The jailer and his
jailer.
Yeah. And what do you think happened to them?
I think they realized that they were the one, as you mentioned so eloquently, they were the ones that were in jail and the others were free. And I think they had a moment of truth.
Yeah.
Maybe a whole new life after that.
Yeah, I think they went and.
Yeah, maybe the jail career was over.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you think, how did people make a transition?
You ran for public office.
Yeah.
Great things in the magistracy.
There you go. He became a hero for yeah. So you think about that.
And what he had so believed, finding out that it wasn't true, had to be shocking too.
Right. Yes, yeah. And there is something about these guys breezing through town and just being chaos, in a certain way. But it's chaos that's actually of the Holy Spirit. Yeah, that's once. Yeah, I think they are truly the Book of Acts. It's about how these apostles begin to live in that way that Jesus lived. Yeah. So, how do you think the authorities were impacted? Not at all. Just like another crazy day at the office.
They weren't amused.
I don't. I think they were probably less impacted than anyone else in the story, because I think that's the culture that they lived in, and the culture that they had the power. They were in charge, and these guys. It was a weird thing that happened. They were a little embarrassed about how he'd been treated, not having known he was a citizen of Rome, but, they could fix that, they could gloss over it, so I think they were probably less impacted than anybody else.
Yeah, and you think of the people who had to kind of tail them outside of town, make sure they really did get out of town, saying, look at those guys, they're just hanging out of Venice, they're not any hurt. They're not any hurt.
If you'll forgive the left teeth.
Please.
Perhaps as the news came up, they yelled pink moose.
Wow. There you go. There you go. Oh, no, that didn't really happen. No, absolutely. So picture yourselves maybe being Paul or Silas or thrown into the jail at midnight singing. And imagine what you were feeling or thinking. What would you be wondering, or what would you be worried about, or what would you be thinking? Yes.
Sorry, I have a question. Do you think they let the other prisoners go too?
It
Or just Paul and
doesn't
Silas?
say. It does say, but they're dealing with their particular case, that they were Roman citizens, so the thing they were charged with, which is kind of being undocumented foreigners who are coming here doing things. Oops. Roman citizens have certain rights, and their rights were violated, and nobody stood up for their rights. And so, yeah, I'm not sure the other prisoners were as fortunate in any way. It didn't sound like it was an amnesty day in that prison. I don't think so, but it doesn't say that. But who knows what the jailer, and what kinds of things began to come from that experience. But if you were Paul and Silas, before all this stuff happened, might you imagine yourself thinking or feeling?
Okay, we're done now.
Yes.
When everything's good, when nobody has a problem, or no trials, and life is happy-go-lucky, you kind of, okay, thank you, God, and it's just so superficial until things get really hard and harsh, and you don't have the answers, and life gets difficult, and it's like, okay, God, you always said you were there. That's when you go to the Word and say, okay, you always said this. you always promised to do this, where are you now?
Right.
You know, like you deserve it.
Yeah, yeah. I would also say, wonder, does anybody know we're in here?
Yeah.
This one.
Does anybody know we're here?
If I come from
God knows, obviously, but
I think it might have a very different slant on it that says, clearly, Paul does seem to be somebody who gets, pardon me, who's pissed off a lot, right? So, okay, so you're throwing me in, so, okay, I'm in here now. I'm gonna speak as big a noise and have as good a time as I can. That's kind of the way when I listen to it and I read it, that kind of comes out to me, and that's probably just part of my personality, is that's what comes, is you take it, make something good out of it, and it's probably what wound up being way more than he ever would have been.
So it's a little defiance.
Yes, yeah.
I get it, defiance, or somehow I'm feeling defiant, I'm feeling whistling in the dark. That's what I think sometimes too in this is, what do you do when you're feeling, terrified, and then sing out, because somebody can hear you, and even if you're just hearing the echo of your own voice, somehow being able to know, sometimes prisoners in the civil rights movement would talk about they would knock on the cell walls, or find a way to pass a little tiny note, or make a noise or something, so that some other prisoner or person could hear them and could really know that they were there. And sometimes they get transferred to other prisons. This happened to Martin Luther King Jr. and others, where nobody knew they'd been transferred or where they'd been transferred to, and people got lost in the prison system as a way of being gotten rid of. Yeah.
I find myself remembering the time when my son got involved in drugs and arrested and ended up going to treatment. And as part of having to go to the 12-step program, I had spent 15 years teaching my kids that God was something we made up because we needed something to believe in. And with all the turmoil and all the pain, I found myself sitting on a hillside, and I said, God, if you're here, show me. And thunder rolled across that valley. I don't know that it actually happened, or it was just how I remember it. But I think for all of us, we can have those times in our life when chaos is our prison.
Or a blessing.
Right, yeah.
And sometimes God sends signs to remind us that I am here. I am powerful. We listen to Joy radio, and one of the things they have is this DJ's children will read scripture. And today's scripture was from Job about God hung the universe in nothing. God caused the mountains to move, reminding us of how powerful God is. And I think we forget that, of the power that God has, and the power in our lives.
When you said, you heard God kind of say, God, are you here? And I think that's what Paul said to the jailer, do not harm yourself. We are all here. It's a very divine statement, isn't it? It certainly was a heavenly, totally unexpected. That was the last thing the jailer would ever expected of hear. And it had to have been the voice of God to him, coming from Paul's voice, in the depths of that prison, we are here.
It's also true that God sends earthquakes, the crucifixion. The earth
Yeah.
shook,
Right?
and the veil was torn.
Yeah.
And Elijah sat listening for God, and
Yeah. Yeah.
the earth shook, but God was not in that. And God's power is there.
Yeah.
We just need to remember it sometimes.
And his points in the story of that accessing that power to heal this woman, or to heal the jailer, or to somehow begin creating this new community, because that's also underneath the story is the story. It's the story of just like how SunCoast was founded, or how MCC was founded, or how Philippi Church was founded. What were the things and the people and the events that happened that shaped that early story? So,
And when he left prison, he went to the woman's house.
yes. Yeah. She was the leader. So the first Christian leader in Europe was a woman, Lydia. She was the first pastor of a church in Europe. Quite amazing. And she was a seller of purple, it said, which was either purple cloth or purple dye. And purple was the color of royalty. It was the color of spirituality. It was also the color of queerness.
Who do you want to call?
In the ancient Near East, all those things.
Even in ancient times?
Yes, yes. A wonderful book by Judy Grahn called Another Mother Tongue. Read it. Amazing stories of tracing back to the ancient Near East, how these things all kind of came together. And she's the head of her household in the story, in the book of Acts. There's no husband, or it doesn't say if she's widowed or anything like that. But she's a businesswoman, very clearly a strong person and a leader, attracted to Judaism first, and then just turned around and inside out by the story of Jesus. And she becomes then this link in this new community. So, yeah. Okay, all right. So the last question I have for tonight is, what might be some guidance or lessons from this story for us, for SunCoast, for MCC? And I have a few suggestions, but you may have others. The courage of Paul and Silas to follow Jesus wherever it led them. The discernment of Paul and Silas to care about the jailer. The courage of the jailer to risk himself. The audacity of Paul to challenge the authorities. All of these things seem very contemporary to me. They don't seem like they're just stories from long ago. They feel like the world we're living in. So, thoughts about you about guidance or lessons? I'm going to sit from.
I'm very struck about who's in prison and who's free, and how that can be interpreted in my life. I think that's extremely powerful, because I know those who have been, when I thought I was in prison, have been my biggest times of growth and change. And people that were, quote unquote, persecuting me, the thought that they were really the ones in jail, that's very big. And I think that could carry through in my ability for compassion and forgiveness.
What else?
I think that I find myself going back to the woman wearing the Puerto Rican flag, her shirt, and being assaulted,
Yes.
and authorities standing by and doing nothing. She was an American citizen, like Paul was a Roman citizen.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Powerful. Yes. Powerful.
And he's the one that was fired.
Someone who hasn't said something yet. Somebody hasn't said something yet. Something you'd like to share. What might be some lessons for us.
I think we always need to listen to that little voice that, you were in prison and you told them, don't harm yourself. We are all here. And I think many times we hear that voice. And I know through the past 2 months I've heard that voice, but it's like, God, step aside. I got this, but I just don't need that help.
Yeah.
But, there's times that and he did. He broke me Sunday night after I left church here. Me and God had a one-on-one. And, that's why I'm here tonight, because it's just like, the world has been lifted off of my shoulder. And, God says, John, it's time to pick up and go on.
Yes.
Your husband's okay, I've got him, and everything's going to be fine. Let's go on. And, there's work that you need to do, and there is. There's a lot of work that we all have to do, and I think when that little voice talks to us, we need to listen instead of turning it off.
So Vicki, I'm going to pick on you.
Yeah.
What guidance, what things for MCC or SunCoast do you think you feel from this story?
Well, I keep thinking about this happened in Philippi, and we have the book of Philippians, which is just, a few pages past, and it's about the story, and it's the letter that Paul wrote to the church, this church. So this was the beginning of this little church, and then later he leaves, but yet he stays in touch with them, and he writes them letters, and they obviously grow, and they struggle, and he encourages them. And so it's just, to me, a beautiful start of the birth of the church and his impact on them, and yet how he didn't, even though he went on and did ministry, he stayed connected to them.
And the book of Philippians is one of the most beautiful, I think, in all the New Testament, and one of the letters that definitely is attributable to Paul, and it's also full of joy. He obviously had a soft spot for this church. Maybe it was some of the characters that helped founded it, but it's where the fruits of the Spirit are in that, and having the mind of Christ is in that. And rejoice, I say to you again, I say rejoice, joy, so much part. So I think of that's very, very powerful.
I think about that, this jailer, his family, probably, and Lydia, helped to found that church. Some of you were beginnings of SunCoast. And, that seed, that transformation that you experienced, then other people receive that blessing.
Yeah, I think about even the courage it took all of us, whenever we did it, the first time we walked into the doors of an MCC church, and how it felt, and the exhilaration on one hand sometimes, and the fear, and the wondering, what was this really? And did we know how much it would impact us when we did it? Yeah. Anybody else?
It just reminded me of the song, Open the Eyes of My Heart. Only change was to open the eyes of our hearts, because had Paul and Silas not sung, the other people would not have come around and understood what you had, or maybe the Spirit moved throughout that whole prison, you know what I mean? And opened their eyes and their heart, and brought them into the community of believers so that they could found a church and bring other people. But without them having their eyes open first, and Lydia's, it wouldn't have happened. So things had to fall into place. That's what keeps making me think.
And I think, Liz, of the vision statement of the church around joyful sound, and that in one sense, one of those pivotal is about that joyful sound that Paul and Silas made, which was such in contrast to their circumstances.
Yes.
Such in contrast. Years ago, I don't remember what preacher, some TV preacher said, once in a while you do pick up a jewel, even if it's from somebody you're not sure what you think about their preaching about this. Somebody said, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing pretty good under the circumstances. And the person said, what are you doing under there? I love that. What are you doing under your circumstances? And I see Paul and Silas rising, above their circumstances, in the sense, Paul said at one time, I learned to be content, whether I'm feasting at Lydia's home, or I'm in jail all beat up and sore and bloody, or whether I'm shipwrecked on an island, or whether I'm, meeting with the disciples in this wonderful place where we're, singing and, coming together. It's that somehow he learned that no matter what, he was okay, because, all the things that he might have worried about before are just, you kind of give them, over to what God is doing. And, Paul couldn't always remember what God was doing. He had arguments with people. The reason, Silas is with him is because he had a fight with Barnabas. So he had his disagreements and his tensions and his issues. He was a human being with flaws. But what's so wonderful is that this flawed person could summon, do not harm yourself. We are all here.
Yeah, and put it in plug for our series that we're teaching, relationships of love and conflict. Paul and Peter is one of them that were their conflict and how they worked it out.
I think Troy Perry is our Paul. I always felt he was our Paul.
Yes. Yep.
I think when I was looking for pictures used in Eclipse, I found myself continually being pulled back to the picture of Paul and Silas and the stocks.
Yes.
Not really knowing much about what stocks are, where their feet are held in
right.
boards. We may be bound by stocks, by things we can't move and can't get out of.
Right.
But we can still rejoice.
It was interesting in very early days, within the first 10 years of MCC, and people were being arrested for different things, and we would have confrontations we didn't even know we were going to end up having, but would. One time he took me aside with a couple other pastors. He said, "So if anybody ever tells you I hung myself in a jail, they're a liar, and don't you ever let that stand, because I never did that." And he said, if I'm in jail, I'm going to be happy being for the cause. I have no need to do that in my life. He said, I have no shame in being a man. And I will never forget the starkness of that. First of all, just kind of hearing somebody say it, realize that could happen,
Wow.
and yet, to hear him just be, don't you ever let anyone say that, because it would never be true. It would never ever be true. Thinking about, that, his personality, first of all, Troy's an extreme extrovert, like I think Paul was, where, there was not a lot of filter. And I always loved that about Troy, that he was so authentic, and, he never had a facade or anything like that. It was always just genuine and real. And it did mean that sometimes things happened that we had to fix, and just, there are many, many stories about, how we got into things that, were a great challenge, but always for good reasons, always because of the heart that he had for people, for human beings, and just for MCC. So, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, evening. Let's pray. Yeah. So, if you have time this week, go and read the story again for yourself. There's always more to this.
Thank you for coming tonight. Absolutely. This is so encouraging. As Nancy said, we've been trying different things and what you all are interested in, and this kind of proves that one of your ideas really was, we'll ride on, and we've got a series coming up.
Absolutely.
We're doing a 4-week series on, and it's gonna be Bible stories again, so salads, and we're calling them summer salad gathering, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
The programming team will be providing the food the first night, and we're gonna be doing a Bible study each of the 4 nights.
Yeah. First night's on David and Bathsheba, those heterosexuals. Although David, I wouldn't really count him. David.
I think we need to pursue Vicky's comment that one of your ideas
Was good.
One of our latest ideas.
Who's driving tonight?
She is. I'm being a Troy. I'm saying I gotta clean up after myself.
God, we love you, and somehow teach us to sing hymns at midnight when it might look crazy or like we don't have reason to, and teach us to discern our earthquakes and to figure out how you would have us behave in situations that can really be transformational. Bless this church that we might be a transformative experience for many people. God, we don't know who you're going to send us. A jailer and his family, a woman who's been possessed with a demon. We just never know who you're going to send us. And let us be open to whoever you send us as we widen our community. Amen. Amen. Thank you.